has its particular challenges of how to live out the lessons I would not say I've learned, but I'm learning, because it's always, I mean, some of these you know, like taking Sabbath, right? And yet we all, when I just recently, my husband and I were co-teaching ministry course, and 13 out of the 13 students said that they weren't taking vacation, that they weren't practicing taking Sabbath, and they weren't taking days off. I mean, it was just incredible. Like, how can we keep going? And so there's got to be, and I think it's a particular challenge if you're co-vocational, if you're working somewhere and having to do ministry, which is what I've been living here. Is I have a very full-time job here, and then the weekends our church life picks up. And just how do you practice that? And I'm just telling you, I have to keep kind of recalibrating all the time how I do that. And part of what I have to do is have space in my life where I listen to my soul and hear its disturbances. Does that make sense? That I have those spaces where I really face the truth of what's not helping my life. When was the last time I encountered God in a deeply personal way? And really ask myself that, and then begin to see what can I add, what can I take away that creates those kind of spaces. And that's been vital, and it's looked different from when we were doing ministry when our kids were little. It looked different. It looks different here. It looks, and so that's why it's always learning. So I come to this confessional place that I don't have it resolved, other than knowing that it's a desperate need of my soul. I have this great image that was given to me of, we've all been on airplanes where they give that lesson that if you're going to get oxygen, put it on yourself first, and then you can take care of the person next to you. And that just is just a reality. That if I'm not breathing in the grace of God and experiencing God's work in my life, for a while, I'm going to be taking short breaths and I'm working on the person next to me, but eventually I'm going to faint, right? And so that's just the life of ministry for me, is recognizing those places. And for me, having a space in which I listen and I hear the disturbance in my own soul, but also hear what God might be calling me into and saying, it's been vital that I have a soul friend outside the church. That I have somebody who I speak honestly with, who I tell the truth to, that I say this stuff that I don't like to admit to other people. I can be brutal about what I'm thinking and not be afraid of the pastoral ramifications because they might know somebody or in my church, that kind of stuff. So I've had a person that we have been traveling together now probably 14 years. And even that, we've got to, every now and then, we both get busy because now she's on the East Coast and I'm here, and we get busy and kind of lose our time together, and we go, okay, let's begin again, let's start again. But that's been just vital to my life, is how this person knows me, and we're very different personalities. She is forceful, hears from God, this deep, word from God, and then lives it out, and is decisive, and I'm processing and reflecting, and we're good for each other. She pushes me, and I slow her down every now and then, and it's just this beautiful place, but mostly it's a place that I know she believes in me, that she loves me, that she desires that I flourish, and that she really doesn't have anything invested in any decision that I'm making. Does that make sense? So sometimes when you're kind of trying to do discernment and praying with others, you can do that with the folks in your church. But there's just a place in which sometimes some of the things that you need to face are things isn't good for them to be included with. And so that's been vital. And then just the third thing that I would name, it's probably a huge number we could go into, is investing in the primary relationships. Is investing into the life with my husband. And I think the most powerful way to protect yourself from all the temptations that face us, but particularly the temptations within marital fidelity, is to invest in a relationship. That's so much better than boundary setting. right? It's so much better than making up rules that if I abide by these rules, these will protect me. I've found if I invest in this relationship and make sure that it's vital and true and active and loving, that will protect me and him from all those other kind of temptations that come. So I know we've got a bunch of other people, so I'll let the others talk, but those are some brief lessons that I've learned and learned. Yeah.
Okay, Deborah Taylor, where are you? Deborah, come on up. Here is the spouse of a minister and grew up as a child of a minister, and now the spouse of a DS. And Deborah Taylor, tell us what you learned, if you will.
Well, I made notes in my iPad so that I don't ramble on too long. But when they asked me to do this, I thought, what a great opportunity to be able to brag on God and what I feel like I have had the privilege of living a tremendous life. Because you know we serve a God that provides. Amen. Amen. Well, as I grew up, as you mentioned, I'm the third generation of my family to live in a parsonage. And I'm also married to an ordained elder. My son's going to be one. I thought we could be called the Levites, the tribe of Levites. My grandfather, he left the job that he had when he was in his 30s to answer the call to ministry. And planted a church that grew to over several hundred, with all the family members doing all the different parts and taking the offering, playing the piano. So that's kind of the way they grew up. And then he pastored that church for 35 years. Until he retired from that same church. I was born when my parents were attending Bethany, which is SNU now, to those of you who know. And I remember growing up hearing my dad, every Sunday afternoon, it was my dad and my grandpa and my uncle, who was a pastor too, on the phone going, well, how was your service? Well, what did you preach on? Well, so, but then they would hear all kinds of great reports about what happened in the service. Oh, we had 4 at the altar today. Oh, yeah. And so I just knew exciting things were happening in the parsonage. And I just, as a kid, I latched onto that and I listened carefully. I go to the services and saw divine healings that took place. I saw because people were obedient to God. And as a kid, I could just hardly wait to be. Now, my dad's pastored much smaller churches, and they had much smaller salaries and smaller parsonages. And so we, as a church family, we grew up as a church janitors. We lived right next door to the church. In those days, you didn't have housing allowances. You had a parsonage, and so we were the church janitors. We had a hotel for every evangelist, and in some ways I've seen way too many of some evangelists on the church, way too much of them. We moved about every 2 to 3 years, because that was kind of the custom of what you did then. And so that made, as a preacher's kid, that made friendships kind of challenging for me and building relationships. And so there was always lots of opinions about the way you should look and the way you should smell and the way you should be. And it would then just change from church to church. So I had a hard time kind of figuring out who I was and what I was supposed to be. And then I went to Ministerial, where I met my husband. And before I went there, I said, I don't have any intention of marrying a pastor. And I had one of that partners, but I did love God. From there, from there we went to seminary, and then youth pastor, then seminary, and then pastor and seminary, and now he's a DS and seminary. So seminary is really part of my life. But anyway, it's as far as lessons I learned, because I had to kind of figure out who I was. That was the biggest lesson for me to learn, was I had to know who I was in Christ. And that my identity and the joy that I had was found in Christ. My personal relationship was everything from an early day on to daily Bible reading and prayer. And whether I was a daughter, a mother, a minister of music, which I did for a while to help my husband, or a teacher, my joy was not found in the hats that I wore. It was found in my relationship with Christ. So whenever I was tempted to say, I'm not good enough, I'd say I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I'm not smart enough, but I have the mind of Christ. I'm not good looking enough, but I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. So I just had to constantly fill my mind with the scripture and the promises of the Lord to stay focused on who I was. to know that there was a shield of protection that encircled me, that God was with me, and that He knows the days of my life. So number one was know to identify, to my identity and joy was in Christ. My number two lesson, and by the way, I just have the top 5, so to speak, was that in dealing with relationships, that I'm not responsible, I am responsible to you, but I'm not responsible for you. So we heard earlier today them talk about boundaries. So I had to say that people a lot of times they want you to be responsible for them and what they do, which is a very codependent relationship. They want to blame you for everything. They want you to be a part of everything. And there's a point where you just have to say, okay, and lead them to the right one who can help them. You can lose lots of sleep over trying to fix other people. As a minister of music, well, there was always choir to deal with and sound men, and I heard somebody say one time I didn't think there'd be sound men in heaven, but I don't know about that. Because of some of the impact you have on service, you have to be in the music business. But in dealing with people, as I learned a little phrase, somebody told me one time that a lion can tangle with a skunk, but when he gets done, he's going to smell like a skunk. So learn to stay away from unhealthy conflicts and that sort of thing. My number 3 thing was that no one cares what you know until they know that you care. And I'm a teacher as well, and so I've kind of taken that. You see that in teaching in school, that people take time, students take time. There are people around you must invest yourself in others. Everyone needs to feel a sense of trust and acceptance, love and safety, freedom to make choices and have fun and pleasure. So you've got to have a balance of there. If you want them to listen to what you have to say and change their life for Christ, you have to invest in them. A lot of people in the world, they don't know who they are. And so, because I know who I am, and I know who my God is, and I know what He can do, I have to just be invested. Another thing which isn't necessarily popular with millennials, I think that I've heard so far, but my husband's calling is my calling. Like I said. I heard this joke that said a mom went in to wake up her son for church, and he said, I don't want to go, and I'll give you 2 reasons why. They don't like me there, number 1, and number 2, I'm not sure I like them either. Mom said, well, I'll give you 2 reasons why you need to go. 1, you're 49 years old, and number 2, you're the pastor. My husband's calling is my calling. A lot of times I have to hold him up. I have to support him. Be there. I've seen many times whenever a spouse can completely devastate a ministry because of fear and insecurities. And so I just set my head early on. I never want to have to stand before the God and be responsible for sabotage of any kind. That I would do whatever it takes and however He feeds. And funny thing is, that as we've gone down the road, and we're in 40 years of it now, that pretty much any time God laid something on His mind, I kind of was already thinking that, right? I could see some of you guys, you feel that too. I was kind of already thinking that too, and God was bringing me along to that thought. Whenever I found out what my strengths were, it really helped, was a huge part of knowing, and I think we're going to have more talk about that, but discipline, empathy, achiever, consistency, so I had to learn what those meant, and that I wasn't my husband, I didn't have that, but I had my own unique, particularly strong leadings. And then the last thing that I would say is that it was impossible to outgive God. If you all found that to be true, it was impossible. Like I said, 40 years of ministry, endless blessings. And I'm not just talking about monetary. I'm talking about just, His assurance, His pleasure, His knowing His presence and His divine protection. Though there were times, whenever we had to make chairs in our apartment out of speakers for the sound system because we just didn't have any money. That seemed like the Lord would call on us to lay it on both of our hearts to make a faith promise pledge. And lo and behold, in our jobs, we got a raise to match not 1 cent more, not 1 cent, but exactly the amount to get pledged. Okay, God. And let's see, and then it seemed like every time we moved, there was a cut in pay. Just the way it worked out. then my kids graduated from college. I remember I went into teaching full time whenever my kids got into junior high, because I had been the worship pastor. I'm a commissioned minister of music, and so I was busy in that responsibility with at church. But then we looked at the college bill and went, oh boy, this is not going to work with on our pastor's salary. And so the Lord provided a way for me to have a job full-time teaching, and His provision still as we're going through, it still didn't look good. When we got down to the end of it, and our kids graduated with 0 college bill. And that was all God from point one. So I just said all that to say that if God calls you to an area of ministry, know that He's going to take care of all the details. I just challenge you to try to outgive God. In fact, would you just call us and tell us whenever you manage to outdo it? Because I think that would be a story to hear. I'll just end with this, that there's an old song in the hymnal that maybe you've heard or not, but it just says, all the way my Savior leads me, what have I to ask beside? Can I doubt His tender mercies, who through life has been my guide? Heavenly peace, divinest comfort, here by faith in Him to dwell. For I know whate'er befall me, and everybody knows it says, Jesus doeth all things well.
All right, now another pastor. Dan Keaton, one of our district coordinators for this event. He's in Garden Grove, California, Anaheim District. Dan.
Hi, I went high tech, so I have 3 points on a piece of paper. I'm Dan, and I'm like growing up in a pastor's family. There's no pastors in my family, and if you were to pick a person who might be a pastor, it would be at the bottom of the list. So if you're one of those people, listen, if I can do it, if God calls, if I can do it, you can do it. Not that like me can do it. But here's 3 things that I've learned along the way that surprised me, and I wish I had gone in a little more thoughtfully. But the number one thing that I think of is nobody will take care of you once you have the title pastor. Because there might be an assumption, and we all know it's wrong, that you've got it all together because you have this title, you have this license, you have this position, you stand on the platform, and you got it all together, and less people will reach out and say, man, you look down, can I help you? You will become the helper. And so I would encourage you and challenge you, and I've learned the hard way that I have to seek out emotional help. I have to seek out relational help. I have to seek out, if necessary, psychological help. Why am I so crazy? Why am I so wound up? What is the deal? I have to seek out physical help. I've got to go to my doctor. I have learned this lesson primarily through a long 4-year illness that I thought I would not come out of it. And it all stemmed from I didn't take care of myself. Or, ladies, gentlemen, listen to my wife. Because she told me to, and I ignored her. So all the spouses said, yeah. Here's the other thing I'm surprised in ministry, and a lesson I've learned along the way. As soon as you have this title pastor, in my opinion, everyone responds to you in some way. And some people, and you gotta love these people, thank God for them, they love you because you have the title pastor. It's like, oh, you're a wonderful man. It used to be young man, now it's just wonderful man, now it's just like person. Because you're a pastor, and they will think highly of you because you have that title, and they might assume that you have a lot of qualities that you really don't have. And what I've learned is, if it's not going to hurt them for them not to know that, I just love them. Oh, God bless you, brother. God bless you, sister. That's so kind. Some people will automatically despise you because you have that title, and they might be sitting in the front row, and they might be on your board. Because you're the pastor. And you have to use wisdom. Some people, you have to use wisdom, you have to use caution, but you have to lead with love. Everyone will, inside the church and outside the church, will respond to you because you have the title pastor. People who are not in the church yet or don't know Jesus yet, they'll have similar reactions, some positive, some negative. Mostly negative, or my favorite is, must be great having a job where you work 1 day a week. And never try to defend yourself. Just answer with this. Just say, it's good work if you can give. But you got to be really smart to get it. Here's another thing, and this is a personal lesson for me. It may not apply to all of you, but you will be consumed by your call. Consumed. And when God called me, it was striking to me, and I thought, well, that was quite an experience. That was pretty cool. And it was confirmed by people who I thought had good confirmation. What I didn't know is that the call grows, and it grows, and it intensifies. And you have to use wisdom, because my body has grown since I've been in the ministry, but my energy level has not. And hopefully with strategic partnership and working together and finding creative ways to get things done and sharing the load, that consuming can spread instead of consuming you. It can catch fire. In that consuming, don't forget to love your family, recreate yourself, have a hobby, even if that means watching a baseball game during a sermon. Right, Joe? So that's what I've learned. Take care of yourself. No one will take care of you. People will respond to you. If you are called, it will grow, and it can consume you. Don't let it burn you out or burn you out. Just let that fire spread.
I don't know who Barbara is, but this is my wife, Becky. I don't want to get in trouble before I get started. And I've got the best looking pastor I've ever been under. Yes, this was something I did not plan on when I got married. Okay? It just kind of came about, and God just kind of hit me upside the head, and I thought, wow, what am I getting into? We've been involved in the church since we've been married. I mean, way before married, and heavily involved. And then my wife got the call of being a full-time pastor probably about 25 years ago. And so that kind of changed our whole outlook on how we did things. I've owned my own business for 20 years prior to that, and when God calls, He speaks to both of us, and He kind of told me that, you know what, you need to submit to this and follow this calling. It was that strong on my heart as it was on hers. So people say, how can you leave a business? How can you leave your home and everything that's comfortable? How can you not when God calls you? That's right. You know, that's one thing people looking on don't understand that. And this is something that you'll have to reflect on throughout your ministry, is your calling. Because you'll get so involved in ministry, and you can get confused on what you're doing. You have to go back to the calling and understand where God called you from and what He's called you to. My favorite saying to my wife, if ministry was easy, anyone would do it. I have to constantly reflect that to her once in a while when something is stirring and stuff. I said, not everyone can do this. It's only the people that are called of God who can see this too. Just kind of an outline of where we've been. We started out in Central California, Porterville. We were there 5 years as she was full-time, transitioning through my business and her ministry. one thing she asked me, she was called into children's ministry, and she said, "Rob, can you work with kids?" Yeah, I can work with my kids. And you're asking me to do what? So this church was good enough to send us to a children's pastors conference. And so I went with her, and we were committed to do everything together. So I went to this children's pastors conference, and God got a hold of my heart. He said, "You can do this. You need to get involved." He gave me kind of the excitement with it, and I thought, wow, that's weird. But anyway, you need to be involved in your spouse's ministry. I really believe that, in some way. We then were called to Colorado Springs. We were there for 10 years. In the transition, we had 3 kids. They were in junior high and going into high school. And so when we made that transition, we said, I will not work. I will support them in all their activities in school, because this is a big transition for them. And family is important. In fact, when we went to that interview, we told them we would not come to the interview unless our whole family came, because I felt it was a calling on the whole family, not just one of us. So God had to speak to all their hearts. And it was amazing to see how he spoke to our kids' hearts in this calling. And they were willing to go, even though it wasn't easy for them. So I think that's very important. Your family is number one. You need to support your family. You need to encourage them in any way. So we moved to Colorado Springs. I'm thinking, okay, I'm on vacation. Yeah, I'm not going to work for a year. Well, the first week of school, I was thinking, what did I do? I left the business with everyone dependent on my decisions. And then my kids are telling me, Dad, I need to be picked up at this time. I need this for school. I need this. I need that. And then the attitude and my ego kind of hit me and going, you know what? Are you going to submit to this? Or are you going to let your ego affect your personality? Once I've allowed that to leave, it was the best time of my life. Spending that year in my kids' life. Taking them to school, involved with them after school, their activities. It was great. Then God called me into ministry. They hired me on at the church, and so I was able to use my gifts in that church, which sometimes if you can work in your area of giftedness, you wonder why you get paid. But it does help. But then we were called to Virginia, and that was probably the hardest move for me. And evaluating that move was, she left 2.5 months before I left, because we had to sell a house and do all this other stuff, and I would not recommend that. That was probably the hardest move that we had. If you're going to do it, try to do it together. It makes it a lot easier. By the time I got there, she's already had the relationships with people, and it's hard for me to fit in. And there was other things there. I mean, God really humbled me in that position, because I was always told, Rob, you will be able to find a job anywhere. You're great with your hands. You can do about anything. When we moved there, that's when the economy hit. There was no jobs anywhere. Everybody was getting fired, laid off. So I had to go back into a type of work that I had my own business. I had to go work for someone that had the same type of business. Very controlling person. The hours, I never understood what retail hours were until I got this job. And I'll tell you, in churches, you have a hard time reaching people because of the way they work people these days. They open and close one day, everybody works weekends and stuff like that. So God really opened my eyes in this time of working in a retail store. And I thought, no wonder families don't stay together. They're never together. They disrupt their whole their work schedules. But the one fortunate thing that I've had is I've always tried to find work that that I can have a flexible schedule. And God's blessed me, except for that little bit of time in Virginia, with different jobs and working on my own and setting my own schedule. So one thing we try to work is anytime we have a conference or anything like that, I try to set my schedule that we would do it together. I think another very important thing is take the day off together. This is a commitment that we've made, is to try to at least take one day a week together. And it's going to help with your relationship, your marriage, and everything else. And just try to take that day and not talk about work if you can. Hey, when you're in ministry, every conversation comes up around ministry. So try to set some time aside and leave ministry alone when you have the opportunity. So God bless you guys, and I just pray for each one of you that God will just enrich you and give you the power and each of you that is called to.
Okay, thank you. Now, the table group numbers are on tables. Before you move, I could call them all out. It's going to be a little confusing until you find your own table. And we have to split up a little bit, be a little flexible because we've got more groups than we have big table groups. So figure it out. You have a facilitator that is going to help you discuss these comments that you've heard. The presenters are going to stay at least for a half hour in case some group wants to ask them a question. So go now, and then at the end of when you're talking, you can leave and have the rest of the afternoon to do your spiritual formation. Okay, time to move. Thank you.